Okay, welcome back, and we are now on to the next 5 of the slide reactions. And so I like to periodically put some slide reactions of like truly famous works that we just don't happen to cover very much in my class. Um, and so just to see how many people might just recognize the Mona Lisa. But even if you didn't recognize the Mona Lisa, you might still be able to recognize it as a Da Vinci painting, or you might recognize it as a Renaissance painting. And even if you didn't recognize that, you could at least recognize it as a painting. It's an oil painting. So Guggenheim is an example of architecture. A number of people thought of this as an example of photography, and certainly the work of art has to be documented with photography, but all works of art have to be documented with photography. But it is a building, so it's a work of architecture. It's a museum, and it's located in Spain. And yeah, so a number of people got some points on this one. Lots of people either said that it was a painting, which is true, or that it's graffiti, which is also true. I think one person mentioned that it was a piece, a masterpiece, right? Um, so you could have gotten multiple points for any of those. The one thing that's interesting is that no one thought to attribute the work to the artist, even though the tag is right there, right? It says Dondi. So you could have just simply said that the artist was Dondi. Dondi White, or actually Donald Joseph White, but you don't have to know his actual name. The tag is more than enough to count for the attribution. The Scream by Edvard Munch, which is technically it's an oil painting, but it has tempera and oil painting and pastel all on the same surface. And so you might have just simply mentioned that it was a painting. You might also have noticed that it is made out of these kind of long, continuous flowing sort of linear marks, that it's very line based. And yeah, I mean, another thing you might have noticed is that like it kind of breaks into these zones where each of the zones are very much organized around analogous colors, but then the color contrast between the different zones is quite strong. And then this one is the last one, which is by Rachel Whiteread, and it's a sculpture. So if you simply just said sculpture, some people sometimes looking at this say architecture, and this is not actually true because it doesn't function in any way. It's not a space that you can go into, but it is definitely a work of sculpture that's about architecture, in that it is the negative space of a stairwell. So in that case, it somewhat references architecture, but it is not actually a work of architecture. And one of the reasons why I talked about it was to discuss this idea of sculpture kind of rethinking this whole idea of the importance of positive and negative, of the interaction between positive and negative volumes. And here with Rachel Whiteread, it's a piece entirely about turning the negative volume into a positive thing. All right, I think I have time. I'm going to go ahead and go through the first set of short answer questions. So the Baroque period begins roughly in 1600 CE. Value contrast has two components: value range, and then the speed of contrast, meaning how quickly things shift from the lights to the dark. So the range is the difference between what's the lightest light to the darkest value, right? How far apart are those two things? But then the speed is how quickly does it move from one to the other. Name two ways to create pictorial space without using a perspective system. Overlapping and scale change are probably the two most obvious, but also changes of value, changes of detail could also count. Also vertical positioning can count. The type of painting that focuses on depicting scenes of everyday life, that's genre painting, Genre. What type of printmaking uses water's tendency, that's lithography. Linear perspective was invented by Brunelleschi in what year? Oh shoot, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I believe it's 1413, but have that written down. Two mechanisms in the camera that can control exposure, that is aperture and shutter speed. When a printmaker is making multiple copies of the same print that she deems, that's called an edition. Okay, and then multiple choice questions. The form of printmaking that uses powdered resin, that's an aquatint. In a camera, the ability to control the range, that is called E, depth of field. The opposite of ambient color is B, local color. The form of printmaking that is like stamping is B, relief printmaking. The form of printmaking that uses the line scratched into a ground and then acid, that is D, etching. Form of printmaking that uses a tool called a rocker, that's A, mezzotint. The beginning of the Baroque period that was partially defined by the rivalry to painters Caravaggio and Carracci, that's A. And then 8, the problem of making sure that each stage of a print lines up with all the previous layers, that is B, called registration. Okay, well, I'll have to get back to you on which question, on question number 6, in the next part. All right, see you in part 5, I think.